Thank you all for coming. I love to see some of the people in the front rows. Earlier on, I had a hard time. Remember, this is not church, so you can sit in the front. It's okay. And I like that, so thank you for doing so. It's good to see everybody here. I have an honor today that being from the rural area, doesn't get to do very often, and that's to introduce the governor of Colorado. And he probably doesn't need any introduction. He's been here before, but since I have the opportunity to do this, I want to go through the whole formal process so I can say I did this. He was a governor since 2011. He's chairman of the Western Governors Association in 2014 through 2015. That's a great honor to have. Graduate of Wesleyan University, and after a career as a geologist, co-founded the Wynkoop Brewing Company, so he knows how to mix it up. Former mayor of Denver for 2 terms. He's a pro-growth governor, supporting economic development in our state. Big time, wanting to support our economy. And I had a personal thing, as I've attended every one of his Christmas parties. He knows how to throw a party. And so without any further ado, our governor, please welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You know, I think you're just about the last group in the entire state that still stands up for the governor. And I don't think that's a reflection of me. I think that was happening for a while, is what I was told. But I do appreciate it. And Keith, thanks for the kind introduction. I appreciate your belief in the power of giving back the power of politics. As always, thank Chip Taylor for, if anyone ever had a job that was a better analogy for herding cats. I'll let that sit there. And Irv Halter's here with DOLA, Department of Local Affairs. You should give him a shout out. I know a number of you told me what a great job he's doing. Shirley MacLaine once said, "Never trust a man when he's in love, drunk, or running for office." And I think I can speak for the room that we're all pretty glad that for, at least for the vast majority of us, there won't be any elections for at least 2 years. And just for the record, I'm done. So I have 2 more years to work with you guys, or the vast majority of you. I know some of you are going to leave at the end of this year. But I think that the best is yet to come. And I think that there's so much more that we can do because we do believe that government can work. Some of us think it should be bigger, some of us think it should be smaller, but I think all of us believe that government can be done better and create, better lives, better opportunity. And I think in doing that, we should be looking at it, we try to look at it up at the state capitol from the bottom up. And no good idea is too small, no large idea is too big. We certainly recognize that we don't have any kind of a monopoly on solutions or ideas. They come from the likes of you and the people you represent. Most of you come directly from a community where you are embedded and know exactly what works, what doesn't work. We've have been and continue to go through all the rules and regulations that the state has. But we'll never get anywhere if we don't get suggestions from your constituents as to what's most frustrating. What's the logic behind this rule or filling out this form? And every time we find a place, we've now gone through 240 what they call lean process improvement systems. So I think that's more than any state in America. And you go from whether it's how we go about delivering someone their driver's license, whatever it is, we try to break it down and go out and talk to the people on the front lines and see if they've got ideas for how we can do a better job and how we can, make sure that people aren't waiting in line needlessly. And I think that as county commissioners and local elected officials, you see those challenges, those problems, and we certainly can't make real headway like we'd like to without your partnership. One thing we learned in this last election is that we all, and I think this is universal, we all have to listen a little harder to the people on the other side that we might not agree with all the time, but we have to listen a little longer and a little harder to hear what they're saying and work on, now or through the elections, the partisanship should be, can go back down to the side, and we can all sit down and work together and say, it doesn't matter what part of the state of Colorado you're from, your idea is as good as anybody else's, and we're going to give it a try. We're going to listen to it and see whether we can make some real advances. I think in the last election, we saw a great sense of failure in our institutions. I mean, that's, I think, real. We've, at least in Colorado, been working to try and create a higher level of accountability, an increase in transparency, starting, I think, the end of January. Don't hold me to that, but shortly, early in the new year, we're going to roll out a transparency in the website that'll cover almost every agency. It'll put out what the real priorities and goals are, and then have a dashboard out there that'll be updated monthly at the least, hopefully more frequently than that describes where that agency is in addressing those issues and their priorities and what they're going to get done. And I think that's a key area here. I think also after the elections, we have a new president who's never been in politics before. For the record, when I got elected mayor of Denver, I'd never been in politics before, and I know the kind of pressures he's under, and the cacophony of advice that he's probably receiving right now from all kinds of people. And I think all of you as local leaders, we should be thinking about ways we can be useful to Washington. I know many of you in this room have made a career out of attacking Washington. Hey, it's fun. I get it. I enjoy it from time to time myself, right? I feel happier if we had a limited season, like we do for bow hunting. But I think and many of you are from rural areas and rural parts of the state, and I know that almost all of your constituents voted for Trump, and vast majority voted for him. But keep in mind that certain things that get out in that election have a direct effect on our rural economy. One comes immediately is he's said that he wants to cancel our trade agreements with Mexico and China. Well, that appeals to some people, but those are our two largest export markets for almost all of our agricultural products. And if you think cutting off a significant chunk of your market isn't going to affect prices in what is already a difficult commodity environment, then you're mistaken. And I think that's the kind of thing I don't think we have to go and deluge and have thousands of phone calls, but we should figure out our conduits to this transition that's going on and make sure that they don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and some of these issues that are going to have a very significant effect on Colorado businesses and especially, I think, given the commodity prices we've had the last couple of years, on our rural industries. It's a funny thing that the Front Range right now is just about choking on its success, right? The growth has slowed down a little bit, but it's still growing, one of the strongest growths in the country. And yet, if you go out on the west slope, and you're not in a resort town, or you go out on the eastern plains, they haven't been brought along on the ride. And I think one of my points I want to make today is that we're willing to roll up our sleeves and put as much time and energy and effort and fight for resources to try and make sure that we do a better job of those communities that have not rebounded sufficiently, that they get the support they need. And I think that there are a bunch of different ways to look at that. One is the basic infrastructure, and when I talk about infrastructure, obviously first comes to mind is transportation, and I'll talk about that, even though the largest infrastructure challenges are really along the Front Range and along I-70 going out to the west slope. We are in a competitive situation. We're competing with Utah to the west and Wyoming to the north in real terms for small businesses, for industries, for entrepreneurs to come. And both of them are pretty red states, last time I checked. Republican governors, Republican legislatures, and yet they are outspending us on infrastructure almost 2-to-1. Right? When you look at, on a per capita basis, what they're building and they're taxing themselves at a higher rate, but they just demand that if they're going to increase taxes, they're going to make sure that every dollar goes into something that people can see and feel and believe in. And I think they've done a better job than we have of building consensus that transportation is one example of something that we all need to believe in. Because I don't think, when you look at Utah's almost half the population we are, and they're spending more than double what we're spending every year on what we call new transportation capacity, right? So they're adding lanes, alternate routes, exit ramps, ways to get traffic moving more smoothly and more rapidly than we are, at, again, more than double the cost, and they have roughly half the population. Right now, they're not large enough to be a significant competitor, but trust me, I can give you a list of 10 or 15 companies that were very interested in coming to Colorado Springs or Pueblo or Denver or Fort Collins or Grand Junction or Morgan County or wherever, and they end up going to Utah just because they see Utah is investing in their future in a better way than we are. So I don't know about you guys. I don't know many people that are more competitive than I am. And while I respect and enjoy the company of Governor Herbert of Utah, I'll be damned if I'm going to let him win. And I think that it really comes down into whether you're willing to invest in your communities. And I don't have any list of limits, right? I don't think we should get money from one place or another. I do think we need more money. I'm willing to sit down with anyone who wants to and look at places we can cut from the state budget. The last few years we have cut pretty aggressively in a number of places, but I'm sure there are other places we can cut. I'm happy to open the door to any person or group to say, there's no one right way to do this. But I can guarantee you we need more money to invest in infrastructure. And I think that's part of the challenge is figuring out how we have that conversation, how we get that process so that we all, in the end of the day, believe in it. One thing Utah does, which is amazing, is I think the last poll I saw was 66% of the people agreed and approved of their legislature's commitment to investing more money in their infrastructure. And they've done a lot better job than we have in doing processes of listening to people and engaging them and getting their opinions in making those decisions of where to expand capacity and where to put more investments in our roads. I'll tell you, too often we hear of all the reasons that you can't do things anymore. It's too much partisanship. Republicans don't talk to Democrats. Well, that's nonsense. That's only true if we let it be true. Last year we did Blueprint 2.0 out of the Office of Economic Development. Fiona Arnold pushed that effort strongly as a bottom-up process to look at where we've been and what in each part of the state people still viewed as their future for the economy. And I think we got some very good ideas for that. The Rural Jumpstart program rolled out last year, and it provides significant real tax incentives for startup businesses and small businesses to locate in rural parts of the state. And I think will enhance the competitiveness of those Colorado communities. And part and parcel with that is that the necessity of getting broadband, high-speed broadband, and I talked about this to you last year, but getting it in all parts of the state. And Irv Halter has been a great champion of this, and recognizing that if we're going to, as economies change and certain industries flourish and other industries diminish, one thing we can make sure is that at least every part of the state has the same basic tools that are used in job creation. And it used to be the telephone, it used to be electricity, and we as a state and this nation, as a nation, agreed that we would make sure everyone had electricity. And we had the rural electrification program. We made sure that everybody had telephone connections. Well, now we've got to make sure that everybody has broadband, and it's not an unusual or unrealistic expectation. If I'd known you were going to clap, I would have given her a. And I'll tell you, it's not an unreasonable expectation. Yeah. Because I think in the end, when you sit and look at it, in a lot of places, your zip code kind of determines or reflects your socioeconomic status, kind of how well you're going to do in life, how much money you're going to make. And I think now, in a funny way, your zip code determines whether you have internet. And that's nonsense, right? And I think, while Keith knows this, he started a business in a place without internet, right?
That's right.
So I think that's a big part of it. Second thing's a big part, and we're really pushing this hard, is make sure we do a better job on workforce training. And most of us never really, over the last 30 years, as we've pushed every kid in the school system to really visualize going to college and graduating from college, and yet 30 years ago, roughly 70% of our kids never got a 4-year degree. All right, now we're at 68%. I mean, it's changed hardly at all, and yet we've made kids who don't go to college feel like they're failures, and we haven't done a good enough job of setting them up to get the skills they need for all the jobs that we are creating as whole professions disappear. Bank tellers, right? We probably have 75% less bank tellers now than we had 10 years ago. And yet, if you look at it, they have skills that are transferable to other industries. We just haven't had a system by which we could do this. We're partnered now with LinkedIn and an organization called the Markle Foundation. There's a website called skillful.com. It's rudimentary right now, but ultimately it allows kids to have a skills-based discussion and vision for their future, so that they're not looking at what courses they take, what degrees they receive, but they're really looking at what skills they accumulate. Then you go on Skillful, they can click on a community college class. It'll show not just the books they'll read, but the skills they'll acquire if they finish that class. They can click on the skills, it'll show what kind of jobs they'll get. Click on those jobs, it'll show who's hiring and what they're paying. And I think that sense of scale, down here in Colorado Springs, we're building a national cybersecurity center. There are right now 9,000 job openings for cybersecurity professionals in Colorado, and you don't need a college degree for probably 2/3 of them. Now, what kind of skills do you need? Well, you need, just like a bank teller, you need to be numerate, high sense of precision, you gotta have a sense of urgency, and you've gotta be collaborative, you gotta work with other people. Those are the same skills bank tellers have. Now, a bank teller probably is gonna need to go take a 6-month course in coding, but coding's more and more just like Lego pieces that kind of fit together. But with that, instead of having a whole profession, a whole career path kind of wiped out, we will be able to build a pathway using technology where we can identify what the skills are that people already have and make sure they get the additional training so they can get the jobs that are out there, because there are a ton of jobs, right? We're just not getting people who've lost their careers into the best paying jobs. Same thing we've been working on with CareerWise, which is an apprenticeship program, and you're all going to be hearing about this. We're doing a couple tests this year, but hopefully the next 2 years we'll roll it out across the entire state, where it's modeled on the Swiss and the Germans, a number of the European countries that never went to this everybody's got to go to college approach. But it allows kids, when they're in their junior year in high school, if they want to, they can go drop out, get a job, and go to work for 3 days and have, get paid and learn what a job's like. And then 2 days they go to their community college or, another place where they'll take a class. But this class, it gets them towards their high school degree, but this class will be it'll be determined and not created, but directed by the industry in which they're working. So a kid who's working for an insurance company, he's not going to get a class in calculus. He's going to get a class in statistics, because that's much more useful for somebody who's in insurance. You'll be able to really more finely attune at what kids learn in those 2 days of school. And at the end of that time, they'll not only have a high school degree, but hopefully they'll have credits that will allow them to, in Europe, the kids keep working as they go through college, and they end up getting their degree when they're 26 or 27 or 28 without any debt. And I think that's a big part of, if you look at why both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders excited so many people, I think it's because so many people of all ages had kind of been left behind in the incredibly rapid change in our economy. And it started with outsourcing and some of the bad trade deals, but then it really went into, I think more rapidly, went into technology and imaging and handheld computer devices, changing jobs and eliminating careers. Last thing I want to make sure I talk about is the budget. The economy is still strong despite the downturn in oil and gas. If you remember back in the mid-'80s, I got laid off in 1986. Our oil and gas company, I was a geologist, and it got sold. Everybody got laid off. We got a decent severance, but every other company was laying people off too, so there were no jobs. Well, we just are going through, or have gone through, just about as bad a recession in the oil and gas industry, and our economy is now so diversified that we didn't feel it the same way we felt it 20 years ago. And that's a very positive difference that I think is having a large impact, or beneficial impact on the state. Even though our revenue is softened, so we have to tune down our budget projections, we're going to probably have to use some of our reserve to balance this year's budget. We've also been able to set aside another $5 million to increase county administration funding, the county admin, and we know that as caseloads have increased over the past few years, most of you have been asked to do more with less. So we're going to go to the Joint Budget Committee and push for that. Just like previous years, we know that we have conflicts in the Constitution that require spending increases, even as the law wants us to do rebates. Under the current law and within the recent forecasts, we can still repay what we're using of the reserve. So our reserve is 6.5%, which is, trust me, not as big as it should be. But we can pay that back next year and still have about $116 million for state priorities. But you have to understand, you got to break that down. Now that takes, we're going to have to cut the hospital provider fee, since it still counts towards Tabor. We're going to have to cut that by $195 million. Now that's money that usually is matched at a federal level, so that's really cutting almost $400 million out of our healthcare system. We'll survive that. I mean, that's not the end of the world. Anybody who's from a hospital, just pretend I didn't say that. If you're from a medical center of any sort. I think the law has, was it 229? We're supposed to spend $109 million in transportation. We're not going to spend all of that this year. We're going to stretch it over a couple years. According to what's in the Constitution, we need $242 million to go to K-12 education just to keep pace with the increase in student numbers and the basic, even though it's a low level of inflation, but student increase and inflation would demand we have $242 million. Now remember, I said we only have $116 million to play with. So again, we're not going to be able to completely keep up with that, with the K-12. Last year we were able to get a bipartisan budget through the Joint Budget Committee and the legislature that I think no one was crazy about, but everybody understood it was going to work. And I think we're going to have that same conversation again this year. But I think figuring out how to find the resources, and I think the transportation, not being able to use that $109 million when we really need about $200 or $250 million a year to begin some of these projects, and we need a steady stream of it so we can bond against it. And once we do that, we'll have to go to the voters, and that's going to take everybody's will to say, all right, we're really going to invest in some large projects, and they're not all going to, they're going to be around the state, but not every community is going to get the equal benefit from it. I think a lot of that's going to require some hard decisions. There's been a lot of misconceptions around that the Affordable Care Act, if we get rid of that, it's going to somehow get rid of the increase we've had in Medicaid spending, and there has been over the last 10 or 15 years a pretty consistent increase in Medicaid. But I think that it wasn't the Affordable Care Act. It really was a couple things. One was that more people were talking about health care and aware that they could get Medicaid coverage. So a lot of people who had always been eligible and never applied kind of came out of everywhere. Also, it's a demographic issue. The population is aging, and we know that of the total Medicaid costs, 42% are for the elderly and disabled. I'll say that again, 42% of all Medicaid costs are for the elderly and disabled. That they only represent 10% of the total number of people. In other words, what we're talking about is elderly folks who really can't take care of themselves well, have multiple medical conditions, or people that are seriously disabled in the same situation. I think that the challenges around Medicaid, we can make some headway. I know a number of you have gotten a chance to meet Donna Lynn, who's our new lieutenant governor, but also the chief operating officer for the state. She was the executive vice president of Kaiser Permanente, which is a huge healthcare, HMO. She ran most of the stuff that was outside of California. I think she ran about a $10 billion a year enterprise. She's another one of those people that she took about, I don't know what she was making, but I think she took close to a 90% pay cut. So when you see her, thank her. Actually, when you get a chance, I'll make sure that I get sick the next time so you get to hear her speak. But she came out here 12 years ago, and I don't know, I think she's 58 or 60, 62, something like that. In the 12 years she's been here, she's climbed every 14er. So she's no slouch, and she's made it a priority. She's gonna go after waivers from the federal government, and we're gonna address the cost issues around Medicaid and around our whole healthcare system as aggressively as we can. Lastly, I want to talk just a couple of things that are issues that have been about the budget about the new budget. One is the expenditures on what they call the gray market. So because recreational marijuana is legalized, some people think they can go ahead and grow it in their own little private warehouse and sell it to a friend to sell out of state. Well, we were aware that that was a risk. We had anecdotal couple of examples. We didn't see a serious issue of it occurring at scale until about 12 months ago. And now I think everybody in law enforcement is pretty convinced that we've got a serious issue, and we're going to take some of those revenues from the excise taxes on marijuana and really come down on that gray market as aggressively as we possibly can. One of the real reasons that many people supported legalizing recreational marijuana was to get rid of drug dealers, or a number of drug dealers, because they don't care who they sell to, right? They'll sell to kids, anybody. They don't, they are no benefit to the system at all. And if we allow that gray market to exist, we have a much harder time getting rid of the drug dealers, because there'll always be a surplus of product that they'll be out there trying to sell. So let me just finish with the push. I think the frustrations that we saw in these elections, and we saw it not just in the national elections, we saw it in the local elections, part of it was this polarization and excessive partisanship at every turn. And I think the only way we're ever going to do anything about that, because trust me, I feel in my heart and soul that it makes our country weaker, and I think it makes our state weaker. It's great to have a healthy debate, but once the election's over, everybody's got to come together, roll up their sleeves, and figure out what is the right compromise. And I think we'll do it. I think there is a real economic advantage if we're the state where it works, where people are willing to take a compromise that they don't think is exactly what they want or what their political party was most excited about, but makes the investments, make sure that we have a workforce training system and an education system and a transportation system that really allows our economy to grow. I think that becomes a model, and I think, trust me, I know how competitive these governors are. Then what we do, everyone else will try to emulate, and the entire country will improve. As Thomas Jefferson said, to get there we have to, and he said, lay our shoulder to the work of the day. And I think that day is here, and I think that's, and one of my staff said that, Hickenlooper, you sound like if you say it enough, people will believe it. Well, in the restaurant business, when I was in the restaurant business, you would go into the restaurant in a bad mood, everything went worse from that day. And you learned pretty quick that when you went in the door of the restaurant, you better make yourself in a good mood, right? And if you kept saying to yourself that you were in a good mood, and you kept acting like you were in a good mood, not always, but pretty often you got in a good mood. And certainly the people around you stayed at a better mood as well. And I think that's to a certain extent, in terms of figuring out how to get to some of these difficult, and these are going to be difficult decisions, but to get to those decisions, it is going to be a function of having to convince ourselves that we can do it. I love before the Battle of Trenton, Tom Paine was with the frozen, defeated Continental Army, and he was writing notes on a drumhead, and he wrote, "The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." And I think in a funny way, what not just Colorado, but what this whole country is going through is a difficult, difficult conflict. But I think it's going to be a glorious triumph when we come out of it. So you're all signed up and deputized to be part of that glorious triumph. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Now I know you're just buttering me up, trying to make sure that Irv Halter sees who stood up first. What few DOLA grants are out there would be, first come, first served. I got a couple minutes for questions, if anybody's got any questions. Yeah. You probably come up to that microphone, I suspect.
Stan Vanderwerf, Commissioner-elect for El Paso County. Thanks for coming down here, Governor. I appreciate everything that you've done for the state. I'm thrilled that you're here, but I know you've been here regularly. This is my first time at this event, though. But I'd like to tell a real quick story and then offer a suggestion, but it's in keeping with several things you said in your speech. My son, who loves information technology, likes to program and write software code, was unable to get that skill at his brick and mortar high school.
Right.
So he ended up going to COVA, one of the virtual academies, Colorado Virtual Academy, in order to obtain that skill set. And now he's a college student at Purdue University getting a software engineering degree. So yeah, awesome.
Mitch Daniels.
Sorry?
Mitch Daniels, isn't he running Purdue?
Mitch Daniels, that's absolutely right. Yes, former governor.
Great governor.
Great governor.
Well, he was an accidental Republican, but he was a great governor.
So my suggestion, I discovered that my son was unable to go to the brick and mortar school and take COVA courses at the same time. He could only go to one or the other. So COVA is one of those schools funded by the state.
Yeah,
the
sure.
brick and mortar is funded by the state. So I think we have a structural issue potentially about getting IT into brick and mortar and maybe using the virtual schools we already have that we pay for that offer those. And I can tell you, being a little biased about El Paso County, all right, we do have a huge shortfall in IT capability requirements, workforce training requirements here for things like the Cyber Center. So it would be a great value for El Paso County. Thank you for your comments.
Great. And I can answer that easily. We have local control, and that is a big part of the problem. Each of your different, the groupings of schools that receive funding are very competitive with each other, and they operate as districts and sub-districts in levels in Byzantine levels of organizational management. And one way to get beyond this is to start teaching coding as another language, right? And let all the schools have it, and again, create a digital support system, which is what I think you're talking about. It's what I know that COVA does a very good job of that. There are others out there, but figure out, pick one and scale it so that it's available to the entire state. And I think that's probably the likely, rather than, the state cannot come in and tell COVA to get along well with your son's school district. That we don't have the authority. I know it sounds bizarre, but I'll tell you that when I was mayor of Denver, there are 13 city council members in Denver, 11 in districts and 2 general, but 13 city council members. The mayor appoints everyone to run everything. Then the mayor, makes the entire budget. If the city council wants to change one line item in that budget, it takes 9 out of 13 votes. It's a great system. Anyway, the governor's role is not that. It's exactly the opposite.
Thank you, Governor, for being here. Rose Puglisi, Mesa County. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the state budget and severance tax. That's a huge issue for a lot of our Western Slope counties. And, you had said that you're open to suggestions from counties on finding efficiencies in state government, just like we are doing on a county level.
Sure.
In Mesa County alone, $261,000 decrease in severance tax means 7 FTEs. I have no place else to take it from. We have cut for the past 4 years. What we haven't seen is the state following suit. And so if that invitation is real, I know there are a lot of commissioners in this room who would love to sit down with you and talk about how you can find better efficiencies in state government, just like we have done at our county level. And so I'd love a response on that. And then maybe at some point we can talk about the recent press conference you had with Secretary Jewell that I attended that affected Mesa County.
Sure. Happy to do either of those. First, the state has, in a variety of places, we have tried to, if not shrink government, certainly restrain the growth. And you have to recognize that our revenues are still growing. Your revenues are going down dramatically. but the state actually has other revenues rather than oil and gas. You guys have a disproportionate, you are dependent upon oil and gas revenues to a disproportionate level. So the state isn't. So we are cutting and trying to restrain government, but we're not in that same level you are. We have been in that point, and we have cut people and diminished, done the same things you're doing. I assume you do. I mean, if ever there was going to be a time to try and make government smaller, and I realize that there's a large chunk of you out there that don't think government should be smaller, but we have baby boomers retiring now at a level that in the next 5 and 10 years is going to be unprecedented. And it's a perfect time to say, all right, we're going to do more with less. We're going to use technology to find ways to deliver those same services for less people. And it's never pleasant, as you know, if you've gone through this. So I was mayor of Denver for 7 years, and we ended up with total numbers 7% fewer employees than when I started. And it's hard, but it's not a bad thing. In many ways, I think it's like pruning, an apple tree, right? If you do it thoughtfully and carefully, you end up actually making the tree stronger, and you get better fruit out of it. You bet.
Governor Hickenlooper, thank you so much for being here and addressing us today. I'm from Pickett County, and on the West Slope, I'm within a region that has just about the highest health insurance rates in the country, let alone in Colorado. And we've looked for solutions before. We really haven't found anything. We're continuing, and I appreciate your prior comments on healthcare. Additionally, as you know from the state demographer, we're all kind of facing an aging wave that is going to be very significant. And so, as much as I want to be hopeful about the future, I'm very concerned about the federal cutbacks that are starting to be proposed around Medicare. And if we end up with a population of 25% of our residents who the new proposals are a voucher program and a privatization of Medicare, I really am just not sure how our systems are going to handle that. There are projections over the prior Ryan plan that it would take over 50% of someone's Social Security payments to then pay their Medicare payments. And so how do we manage our population health when we're facing those issues? Right now, people between 58 and 64 can't even get health insurance that they can afford as a family. They're closing businesses, they're moving. We have black market work happening so that people stay under the subsidy levels. And how do we untangle this mess?
Well,
How do we do that?
Well, let me get back and talk about the severance taxes. I should have said in terms of severance taxes that the state budget accommodated. We lost a lawsuit with BP Petroleum last year that meant we lost over $100 million in severance taxes. So the state has been out of the general fund backfilling what otherwise would be going to pay off those severance taxes over the next several years. I think this year almost $100 million of total backfilling from the general fund. So just in terms of severance taxes, the state does accept some significant responsibility there. My understanding of what the president-elect has said is that he's not going to unduly penalize Medicare or Medicaid. And when you talk about block grants, which some people love and some people hate, you're wasting your emotional energy loving or hating until you know what they're talking about. And there's several keys. Is the block grant going to be a flat cap? In which case, that over time, you're going to squeeze more and more and more. And in some cases, as you're going to have more and more people coming into the system, which would be the question with Medicaid, is there going to be some provision to allow for cyclicity? When you have often a downturn in the economy is when people need the support the most. And is there some accommodation for that? Those are the things that really have an effect on whether a block grant can succeed or not. And I think my understanding, maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I think that the President-elect Trump has said that he wants Medicare, I don't think he'll even support a block grant, to be blunt, is just from the buzz I've heard, and that's not one of the places he's going to cut spending. I do think he's going to cut spending in a lot of other places. I think the EPA is probably going to get a huge cut in spending, and a lot of the money that we spend helping you guys do your water testing and putting in new systems and that, a lot of that money comes through the EPA. And I think there are places like that we're going to have to be very attentive to and say it's just like when we're going through the regulations and the red tape. How do we make sure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? I'm all for less is more, but make sure that the essential projects that we're working on don't go, suddenly they lose their funding and that we have to, roll them up and stop working on them.
I'm Justin from Mesa County. Thanks for being here. And several years ago, a good thing that happened for our community up here is you came out and we talked about the shooting range at Cameo.
Yeah.
And actually, after a long program of what all went on, we actually approved a conditional use permit like 60 days ago. So I'm glad with that. But one of the problems talking to our DA is that the public defenders, the quantity of them in the state goes up, they get paid more. Our county staff, we can't afford to pay them more, we can't really keep the people we have, and he's like overwhelmed. I don't think that's right. And the severance tax.
Wait, what does that have to do with Cameo?
Pardon?
What does that have to do with the shooting range? Did I miss something? Oh, that was a thank you, I'm sorry. It is such a foreign experience to an elected official. You guys should all be able to appreciate that. I'm sorry. I got it. So, all right. How many of you guys know what Cameo is? So maybe a 20% of you maybe. So Cameo is a sports shooting facility that we're building out near Palisade. Really, it's yeah, but Parks and Wildlife's doing it in conjunction with the county and a bunch of partners on this thing. But this is where you get a little golf cart and you drive to the first spot and they shoot clay pigeons out from different spots and you shoot them with your shotgun and then you drive to the next spot. It's almost like playing miniature golf, right? You go around, there'll be 18, I guess that's disrespectful. I shouldn't have said that. I've been going on the sports shooting ranges for the last 4 years. Every time I go somewhere, I try to see one. If they've got one. And ours is going to be so much better than anything else in the country. It really is. It's just going to be, I'm serious, it's going to be spectacular. But anyway, so luckily there was a log jam of bureaucracy that we had to shake about 3 months ago to get it done. So you're worried about public defenders and they get their pays. So if you're looking at the governor, I have no voice in how that works. You may not have been watching closely the last few years. Generally, when I lean on the legislature, they smile, they pat me on the shoulder affectionately, and then they go back about their business. So, I think maybe I'm misremembering, but for the last 2 years I've said the hospital provider fee, John Southers, the former Attorney General, Cynthia Kaufman, the President Attorney General, all think it should not count towards Tabor. It should be a fee. It is a fee. It looks like a fee. It smells like a fee. It is a fee. Have you seen them take any action on that? No. No, they won't even discuss it. It had never come out of committee 2 years in a row. So I will raise, I totally agree. I do recognize the conflicts of, especially in smaller communities, what that does to your workforce.
From our opinion on the West Slope, the severance tax money is supposed to go to impacted communities, and that does happen, but it seems like it's, let's take some money out of there for this project, that project, and that's kind of discouraging at times, I would say, on that issue.
Well, the problem right now is there's just not very much severance tax money for anybody, right? So a certain chunk of it is protected but it's just a percentage, so it's not like they're getting a special deal, but for the Department of Natural Resources, right? So for wildlife habitat and some of the places that get affected by oil and gas operations in one way or another. But, it's not like there's a lot of severance money around there for anybody. No, just for the record. I know we want to be fact-based here, but just for the record. Yeah, right, exactly. Just for the record, if you want to look where severance taxes are generated, they're not generated from the West Slope at the same level they used to be. Yeah, exactly. What was the second part of your question? You had a second part?
John Hill, Red Blanket County Commissioner. Anyway, hold on to your hat up. Do want to thank you about a couple of things. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to thank you for recognizing how important foreign trade is to our agricultural products. And secondly, I want to give you a pat on the back for your discussion about working together and stuff in the political climate that we've had the last few years. You know, it's most important that we should all work for the betterment of our county, our state, and our country together and see where we can progress in the future, you know. But along with that, though, I want to, have to harp a little bit more on the severance tax. Right now, Rio Blanco County is well on its way to supplying broadband infrastructure to every resident of our county. And one of the ways that we've been able to do that is through DOLA grants, and we totally appreciate that ability. But I'm also on the Yampa White Green Basin Roundtable, and I know that there won't be any more funding, which is the CWCB is totally dependent on severance tax money, and unless the legislature acts, there won't be any more funding for it until July 1st next year. Not that they will cease to operate, but it's going to be hard on grant funding. And one of the projects we have in our county is the proposed Wolf Creek Dam, and I think that's going to be possibly the biggest economic driver we could have, along with broadband, to uplift our county. So I would just simply ask that your office and the legislature both would resist any temptation to further erode the severance tax down. And I do understand totally the ramifications of this lawsuit and everything. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and thanks for the kind words. But I was dead serious. I mean, we've put, I'm pretty sure it's over $100 million in this, coming budget that's going out there, that we're backfilling money we're taking money from the general fund and using it to make up the shortfall in severance tax to at least get us where the hit isn't so detrimental from the lawsuit, right? So anyway, I appreciate that, and I hear it. Yes. Uh-oh, shoot. I think I have to go. I think I'm out. All right.
I know you like me, so. Governor, first of all, go Buffs. And with all due respect to the honorable commissioners from the Western Slope, I think we all know where the oil and gas production in the state is occurring in.
Thank God it's occurring in such a generous county, is all I can tell you.
But with that said, and we certainly appreciate your comments with regard to severance and your willingness to essentially try to protect those funds for local governments where essentially they really should be going to meet the needs and deal with the impacts of the oil and gas and the conversion and development of oil and gas and all of that. I just want to remind you, there was a 4-year period where we didn't receive any severance grants, energy and mineral impact grants. It was not during your term, but it was a previous term, and hundreds of millions of dollars went from severance to assist the state. So I just want to keep that in the back of your mind as you're talking about the $100 million that came from the general fund. Well over $100 million came from our energy and mineral impact grants, severance funds, that went to help backfill state issues, the state budget challenges. But with that being said,
and I appreciate that, and we're one state. What I constantly say, I say it in the urban areas, I say it in the rural areas, we are one state. And on those times when that happens, again, we try not to let that happen. We're doing everything we can, not now, but we do, as someone who can speak for the state, we appreciate that.
yes. So I just want to talk to you really very briefly about 3 legislative or budgetary priorities for CCI. Okay. The first is the county admin that you talked about in the $15.7 million. It is greatly appreciated. We greatly appreciate you putting in the budget. We just heard from what will soon be a former JBC member that we all need to, counties and the state, need to go in and really ensure that we keep that in there. And quite frankly, thank you for $15.7 million, but it's not enough. So if we can continue to work on that. I'm thanking you for.
Next year, you're coming up to my office and you're sitting beside me when Henry Sobanet comes in and does all the budget, because you see how much fun it is to cut every single project. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
I've done that a few times. But, Governor, no, greatly, we do appreciate that. That is a priority for us, so we greatly appreciate you recognizing that, and we hope that it continues. The second issue, as far as budgetary, has to do with the child welfare program and the additional FTE. You know, there was a audit and a workload study that was done 3 years ago that came back with, that said anywhere from 650 to 700 new FTE needed to be provided in counties that are implementing a state program. And the JBC over the last couple of years has implemented what they call the 100 FTE, and it's approximately, the first year it was 6.2 million, the second year it was like 5.7 million. This year it's dropping down to something less than that. It is still a huge need for counties. And believe me, everyone in this room understand the budgetary impacts, folks at the state level, certainly at our levels. But this again is another area where we would hope that we could continue to partner with you as the governor and your executive branch to really relay to the JBC and our state legislators that funding those FTE are extremely important statewide for the health of our families and children. So that's another one of our legislative priorities. And our budgetary priorities. And lastly, one of our other legislative priorities, and I can't think of all of them, but this one does pop up because we've had these conversations with you. It is the restaurant inspection fee. That is a state program that is contracted for counties to do. So it is not a mandate. It is not our program. Last year we were able to get the fees increased, but there was within that legislation there was a portion, as I'm pretty sure you very well know, that essentially we call it the supplanting language, that doesn't allow us to actually get rid of putting so much of our general fund into a state program. In Weld County, we are subsidizing restaurant inspections to the tune of about 70%. So that's about a $700,000 cost to our county to subsidize the state program. And last year we had legislation that put in supplementing, supplanting language, and we would hope greatly, as you put in your letter to us when when that bill passed and when it's law, that you would support us in the legislation that we're pushing forward this year to get rid of that supplanting language, and also to add in language that would give us local control, because while maybe not in my county, there are other counties in this room that would like to have the ability to decrease the fees, because they see that as an economic development issue for them to keep those restaurants in their communities. And so, again, that's another one of our legislative priorities, and we would hope to have your support on that as well.
Well, we'll certainly look at it. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for all your hard work, and I do like you.
I knew that, thank you.
I think you're looking at somebody who spent 14 years in the restaurant business, and I can't tell you how many restaurant inspectors came into my restaurant, and I knew damn well they were going to find something we failed on just so they could fine us $50 or $100. And I know I sound like every other restaurant person you've ever heard, but that might be because it's true. And I ask our staff at the Department of Revenue, every time this comes up, I say, well, why do we need some? Who determines how many times we have inspectors? And how many people do they really, usually when we have a foodborne illness, and some of them are very, very serious, so, this is something you just can't make jokes about, but generally, we find out about it from the hospitals, because people are going to the hospitals. We rarely, most of the things that our inspectors are inspecting for doing are things that are, generally not the things that lead to foodborne illness. I can't even say that, foodborne illness. So I'm certainly open to discuss it, and I have to walk and I have no interest, I'm not in the restaurant business anymore. Wouldn't coop everything, I sold it in 2008. But I am very sensitive to the issue of people running those small businesses, because I know how hard it is and how frustrating it is when somebody comes in and slaps you on the wrist to the tune of $200 because you had a colander sitting on a sink stand where you had done some pots and pans before. It's like, wait, that was all waiting. It was all going to get clean. So, that's something I think we are still continuing to look at what is the right process to go through every single regulation in the entire state on everybody, and make sure that we protect the public, which there's not a person in this room that doesn't believe we have to protect the public. But there's got to be a better way of doing it. I think I'm out of time. There's a hook.
Out of time.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a good
Thank
session.
you all. Let's not- Thank you. Appreciate it.